Let's get to it. We're told the first nuclear explosion happened in 1945. But if that's true, how exactly are we finding 8,000-year-old skeletons in the Indus Valley with radiation levels 10 times higher than the normal background rate? Forensics don't lie, and the math of these 12 skeletons presents a physical impossibility according to our current historical models. From the glass cities of India to the vitrified tombs of the Sahara, these remains aren't just fossils, they are some of the most baffling unsolved forensic mysteries on Earth. We're looking at mathematical paradoxes that physically shouldn't exist in our timeline, yet somehow do. Are we looking at natural recurring cataclysms we don't fully understand yet? Let's look at the data. Chapter 12. The Tektite Grave, Southeast Asia. In the dense, suffocating jungles of Southeast Asia, archaeologists uncovered a 12,000-year-old hunter-gatherer grave that looked entirely normal from the surface. But as brushes swept away the topsoil, they didn't just find ancient bone, they found a skeleton resting in a bed of microtektites, black, glassy stones born from extreme cosmic violence. This wasn't just a burial, it was a forensic anomaly frozen in astronomical time, presenting an absolute nightmare for anyone trying to build a logical timeline of human history. Here is where reality starts glitching. Fact A: forensic analysis reveals these microtektites are physically fused deep into the victim's ribs and skull. Fact B: the archaeological timeline places this burial at 10,000 BCE. Tektites are aerodynamically shaped glass requiring temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, usually formed when a massive meteorite strikes the Earth, ejecting molten quartz into the upper atmosphere. The Standard Model claims this is just a coincidental burial right on top of an ancient impact zone. But the physical evidence complicates this. To have tektites embedded directly into the bone matrix, the glass had to strike the victim while still molten and traveling at terminal velocity. The clinical reality: the micro-glass spheres lodged into the victim's skull like cosmic buckshot, rapidly vitrifying the soft tissue to permanently weld themselves to the skeleton. You would need an impact event of cataclysmic proportions, yet there is absolutely no localized crater within 1,000 miles. You cannot have a localized shower of 2,000-degree molten glass permanently scarring a human skeleton without an extinction-level crater nearby. Either our understanding of tektite formation is fundamentally flawed, or this ancient human was caught in an atmospheric airburst that physics says shouldn't exist here. And if dodging molten glass rain from the heavens breaks your understanding of ancient hazards, wait until you see what happens when the sun seemingly touches the Earth directly. Chapter 11. The Sahara Atomic Hunter, Libyan Desert. Deep within the unforgiving dunes of the Libyan desert, a lone skeleton was unearthed that fundamentally defies the laws of radiology. Discovered in a region notorious for its shifting sands and extreme isolation, this 8,000-year-old nomadic hunter wasn't just preserved by the arid climate. The bones themselves carry a terrifying scientific secret, radiating an invisible energy that literally triggered the dosimeters of the excavation team. We are looking at a prehistoric man carrying a modern isotopic signature. Fact A: the skeleton emits elevated levels of residual radiation, specifically showing isotopic scarring consistent with exposure to a massive high-energy burst. Fact B: the remains belong to the Holocene epoch. The textbook explanation casually dismisses this as natural background radiation accumulating over millennia. But the thermodynamic math doesn't lie. For bones to permanently retain this specific isotopic signature, the subject had to be exposed to a localized, instantaneous influx of ionizing radiation. Worse, the marrow cavity is entirely calcified, a bizarre biological reaction where the internal fluids underwent rapid thermal expansion,
fracturing the bone from the inside out in a fraction of a second. The surrounding desert sand, however, shows no sign of prolonged heating. You cannot have a human being subjected to a rapid influx of radiation that instantly calcifies marrow in the middle of a pristine, undisturbed desert without a source. Either a rogue cosmic event targeted one specific region, or something terrestrial released an unexplainable thermal burst. If the idea of an ancient, localized radiation anomaly gives you pause, the next dataset takes this thermal impossibility to devastating new heights. Chapter 10. Peruvian High-Altitude Burn Victims. High in the Andes Mountains, at an elevation where oxygen is scarce and freezing temperatures are a daily reality, lies a mass grave that shouldn't exist. Researchers uncovered a cluster of pre-Incan remains huddled together in a shallow cave. But these weren't victims of freezing or starvation. Instead, their skulls bear the unmistakable bizarre hallmarks of being subjected to an intense, flash-level heat source completely alien to this freezing high-altitude environment. Fact A. The tops of the skulls show extreme thermal fracturing and localized carbonization that only occurs when bone is exposed to intense, flash-level heat. Fact B. The victims are at an altitude of 14,000 feet, dating back over 3,000 years, surrounded entirely by ice and rock. The historical consensus interprets these as victims of a localized ceremonial burning. But the physical evidence utterly breaks that narrative. To achieve this specific thermal fracturing, the bone must be hit with a burst of heat exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius in milliseconds. A standard ancient wood fire peaks at about 800 degrees Celsius and requires hours to char bone. Even more disturbing, the soft tissues inside these skulls instantly dehydrated and shrank, a process requiring sudden, catastrophic atmospheric friction. A ceremonial fire cannot physically generate the 1,500-degree instant flash required to perfectly carbonize a skull while leaving the neck and spine completely untouched. Forensic archaeologists are still debating if this was a rare solar micronova or an unprecedented tectonic plasma discharge. And if localized thermal bursts in the freezing mountains shatter your logic, wait until you see what happens when a human breathes in a dying star. Chapter 9. The Australian Falling Star Forensic Site. In the remote outback of Australia, nestled near an ancient impact crater, Aboriginal remains were found that challenge both the timeline of human evolution and cosmology. The skeleton, resting in a localized patch of scorched earth, presents a staggering forensic puzzle. It is an artifact that seemingly bridges the gap between terrestrial archaeology and deep space astrophysics, leaving researchers entirely baffled by its molecular composition. Fact A. The skeletal remains are laced with iron-60, a rare radioactive isotope produced exclusively in the heart of dying stars and supernovae. Fact B. Anthropological dating puts the remains at around 4,000 years old. The early interpretations suggested the individual simply died near a localized meteorite strike that peppered the area with ancient space dust. But the math absolutely destroys this. Iron-60 has a half-life of 2.6 million years, and the sheer concentration found within the bone marrow would require the subject to have ingested or inhaled vaporized stardust directly from an active, ground-level thermal anomaly. The forensic reality is astonishing. The victim's lungs would have been inhaling air heated to over 600 degrees Celsius, instantly vitrifying the soft tissues of the respiratory tract before they even hit the ground. You cannot have an ancient human organically incorporating supernova isotopes into their cellular structure unless they were standing ground zero during an impossible astronomical event. If inhaling vaporized space metal sounds like an anomaly, This next paradox turns the human body into a geochemist's worst fever dream. Chapter 8. The Dead Sea Salt-Fused Remains. Along the arid, hypersaline shores of the Dead Sea, archaeologists excavating ancient settlements made a discovery that borders on the biblical. They unearthed human remains that had undergone a chemical transformation so rapid and bizarre it defies all known rules of natural decomposition. These aren't skeletons, they are statues. The bones have been entirely replaced by dense calcium carbonate shells, forever freezing the victims in exact postures of sudden shock. Fact A. The remains were chemically transmuted into calcium carbonate structures in a matter of seconds. Fact B. The stratigraphy dates these remains to roughly 1650 BCE. The established view claims this is just standard fossilization accelerated by the highly saline environment of the Dead Sea over thousands of years. But physical chemistry pushes back hard. For bone to undergo instantaneous calcification without collapsing into dust, it requires a concussive shock wave traveling at 700 miles per hour combined with a thermal flash of at least 2,000 degrees Celsius, instantly vitrifying the soft tissues of the air before the porous bone marrow. The result? The victim's internal organs were flash petrified, turning the cellular structure into solid saltstone before the nervous system could even process the stimuli. Normal fossilization takes tens of thousands of years of steady mineral replacement, not a singular, hyper-violent second that petrifies a living subject. We are looking at a massive meteorite airburst that perfectly sterilized this city, or an anomalous atmospheric pressure wave we haven't mapped yet. If flash petrification makes your brain itch, prepare yourself for what happens when a cave becomes a microwave.
Chapter 7. The Flash Carbonized Cave Remains. Deep within an intricate limestone cave system in Europe, explorers stumbled upon a morbid, pitch-black tableau. Dozens of skeletons were found deep in the subterranean darkness, positioned as if they were desperately seeking shelter from an outside threat. But the darkness didn't save them. In a terrifying display of localized thermal destruction, these remains were completely carbonized, turned to brittle charcoal, while the cave around them remained pristine. Here's where the forensics get weird. The skeletons are completely carbonized, yet the cave walls just inches away show absolutely zero signs of smoke, soot, or thermal damage. Meanwhile, the timeline insists these remains date back to the late Pleistocene era. It's often assumed that primitive humans must have started a massive fire inside the cave that eventually burned out of control. But thermodynamics proves this is a mathematical impossibility. A fire burning hot enough to carbonize human bone around 800 degrees Celsius inside a confined cave would leave thick, permanent layers of soot and completely strip the oxygen, suffocating the victims long before they burned. Instead, the evidence points to a high-frequency microwave effect. The subcutaneous fat boiled instantly, resulting in rapid cellular expansion that ruptured the epidermis from within, cooking the bodies via an electromagnetic radiation wave that passed right through the solid stone walls. You physically cannot burn dozens of bodies to ash inside a closed limestone cavern without leaving a single trace of smoke on the ceiling. Either the laws of combustion took a day off, or these people were exposed to an invisible, rock-penetrating energy wave. If the idea of prehistoric electromagnetic anomalies seems logically impossible, the next paradox brings this terrifying heat to the surface. Chapter 6. The Babylon Thermal Shock Bones. In the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, near the legendary city of Babylon, an excavation of a collapsed ziggurat revealed a chilling mystery. Beneath layers of sand and time, researchers found skeletons pinned beneath the massive mud bricks of the structure. But the cause of death wasn't a simple building collapse.
These bones tell a story of a localized inferno so intense it defies the capabilities of ancient architecture and metallurgy. Let's look at the baseline data. The skeletons exhibit profound internal calcification, and the mud bricks directly above them are completely vitrified, melted into solid glass. Now compare that to the historical consensus. The structure is definitively dated to the Babylonian Empire, thousands of years before the invention of industrial blast furnaces. Was this the result of a massive, out-of-control city fire? Physics immediately calls a foul. To melt Babylonian mud brick into green glass requires sustained, concentrated temperatures exceeding 1600 degrees Celsius. Even the most roaring ancient wood or oil fire tops out at around 900 degrees Celsius. The thermodynamic proof is in the marrow. The bones weren't just burned, the moisture inside the marrow cavity expanded so rapidly that the femurs underwent catastrophic structural failure, fragmenting violently from internal thermal shock. A standard fire burns from the outside in, but these victims were quite literally baked from the inside out. No ancient city fire can mathematically generate the 1600-degree heat required to vitrify clay bricks, let alone cause human bones to violently shatter from internal thermal shock. We're looking at an unprecedented geomagnetic event or localized plasma bolt. And if anomalous bone fragmentation shatters your view of the ancient world, wait until you see how ancient stone itself succumbed to this impossible heat.
Chapter 5. The Scottish Vitrified Fort Dwellers. Across the rugged highlands of Scotland, there are over 60 ancient stone forts with a profoundly disturbing architectural anomaly. The massive granite and sandstone walls haven't just tumbled down, they have been melted into solid, vitrified glass. We've talked about the melted walls before, but we never looked at the victims trapped inside. Locked within the fused masonry of one such fortress, archaeologists discovered human remains that challenge the very chronology of cause and effect. The physical evidence demands a second look. The human remains found trapped within the melted rock show signs of instantaneous incineration, occurring before the surrounding stone had even begun to turn liquid. The historical timeline, however, insists the forts date to the Iron Age, a time when creating even a small forge required immense effort. The prevailing theory explains vitrified forts as a deliberate construction technique, arguing builders stacked wood against the walls and set it ablaze to strengthen the stone. The math makes this incredibly hard to defend. Granite melts at approximately 1200 degrees Celsius. You would need thousands of tons of wood burning constantly for days to melt a single wall. Yet the trapped victims showed respiratory tissues that were seared shut in a microsecond, a gruesome biological timestamp proving they were subjected to extreme heat instantly, long before any theoretical week-long wood fire could even warm the rocks. You cannot mathematically melt tons of solid granite with an Iron Age bonfire, and you certainly can't instantly incinerate the defenders in the very same millisecond. Either our understanding of ancient Scottish metallurgy is missing a massive piece of the puzzle, or these forts were subjected to a sudden extreme thermal anomaly. If melting castles breaks your brain, this next anomaly proves the sand itself holds impossible memories. Chapter 4. The Gobi Green Glass Graves. In the desolate expanse of the Gobi Desert, researchers made a discovery that mirrors the data collected during the mid-20th century. Scattered beneath the shifting dunes are massive patches of green, translucent glass, chemically identical to trinitite, the exact substance formed during high-energy atmospheric testing. But nestled directly within these fields of anomalous glass are ancient human remains. The chemical signature tells one story,
The skeletons are physically fused into the layers of this trinitite-like glass, meaning the humans and the sand were melted simultaneously. The historical placement tells another. The remains are carbon-dated thousands of years before the modern era. Could this be a localized meteor airburst? The physical evidence refuses to comply with standard impact models. Trinitite requires not just 1400 degrees Celsius heat to melt the sand, but a specific, sustained pressure wave to compress it into these exact green sheets. The physiological reality is written on the bones. The victim's teeth underwent rapid thermal expansion, shattering in less than a tenth of a second as the silica around them liquefied and cooled almost instantly, trapping them in a glass matrix. You cannot naturally create trinitite glass fields peppered with human remains without a massive thermal and pressure wave. While some scientists suggest an undetected comet impact, others are looking at data that points to intense atmospheric plasma discharges. And if walking on a beach of ancient anomalous glass disturbs you, prepare for a mummy that rewrites the stars.
Chapter 3. The 12,000-year-old radioactive mummy. In a deeply concealed cave system in North America, archaeologists uncovered a 12,000-year-old mummy wrapped in intricately woven textiles. The dry cave environment perfectly preserved the body, but when researchers ran routine radiocarbon dating on the remains, the machines returned data so erratic and anomalous that it sent shockwaves through the isotopic testing community. The isotopic reading screams impossibility. The mummy's wrappings and bones exhibit extreme localized spikes in carbon-14, registering radiation levels exponentially higher than any naturally occurring organic baseline. But the archaeological record confidently places the mummy at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BCE. Is this simple contamination from modern testing equipment or groundwater leaching? The thermodynamic math is uncompromising. To embed this specific, high-level C14 signature permanently into a desiccated corpse, the body had to be exposed to a massive influx of cosmic rays, an isotopic bombardment akin to a direct hit from a nearby supernova or a catastrophic solar flare. The physical evidence is startling. The intense radiation caused the cellular structure in the mummy's dermal layer to completely cross-link, turning the skin into a highly radioactive, chemically synthetic compound. You cannot have an isolated mummy registering the carbon-14 signature of a direct cosmic radiation burst without challenging our entire model of ancient solar activity. If an irradiated mummy strains your credulity, this next paradox will bend the very fabric of time. Chapter 2. The Harappa Hand-in-Hand Couple. In the ancient ruins of Harappa, a sprawling metropolis of the Indus Valley civilization, excavators found a deeply unsettling scene. Amid the rubble of the once great city, two skeletons were discovered lying peacefully, hand in hand, right in the middle of a street. They weren't buried, they were dropped where they stood. And the forensic data pulled from their bones requires a complete reevaluation of historical hazards. Here is the data point that breaks the model. The skeletons register highly anomalous radiation levels, and their peaceful posture indicates they died instantly, without a single moment to react to an incoming threat. Yet the historical consensus claims they died of starvation or a sudden plague when the city fell into ruin around 1900 BCE. The physical measurements shatter this innocent narrative. To expire so rapidly that the muscular system does not even have time to contract in a defensive flinch, the fatal event must have overtaken them faster than the speed of human nerve conduction, faster than 250 miles per hour.
Furthermore, the radiation levels in their calcified joints are staggeringly higher than the normal background rate. The clinical reality is that whatever hit them stripped the cellular mass from their bones so quickly that their nervous systems literally didn't have the milliseconds required to register the event. A plague or famine does not leave radioactive skeletons holding hands in the street, dead before they could even react. Either an invisible, supersonic wave of radiation swept through Harappa, or we are completely misinterpreting the physical data of ancient environments. And if a supersonic radiation wave breaks your perception of history, the final paradox will permanently shatter your reality.
Chapter 1. The Lurking Death Skeletons, Indus Valley. We arrive at the absolute pinnacle of ancient anomalies, the lurking death skeletons of Mohenjo-Daro, the sister city to Harappa. Here, archaeologists found dozens of bodies scattered chaotically across the streets, unburied and abandoned by scavengers. But it isn't the sheer number of the dead that makes this the ultimate glitch in our historical matrix. It is the impossible physics trapped inside their very bones. The physical reality is uncompromising. The bones exhibit a highly specific unnatural crystallization that only occurs when calcium is exposed to a heat source so sudden and intense that it instantly vaporizes the marrow. The historical reality is entirely incompatible. Mohenjo-Daro is a Bronze Age settlement, thousands of years separated from any known mechanism capable of such temperatures. Is this a simple case of post-mortem chemical alteration over time? The math makes that highly improbable. To crystallize human bone without turning it to ash, the skeleton must be subjected to a brief, microsecond flash of heat exceeding 2,500 degrees Celsius. The physiological truth is jarring. The heat hit these victims so fast that the internal moisture flash-boiled into steam, causing catastrophic cranial expansion from the inside out, yet leaving the fragile clay pots resting just inches away, completely untouched. You mathematically cannot generate a 2,500-degree microsecond heat flash in a Bronze Age city that vaporizes marrow but leaves a delicate clay pot perfectly intact. Is this a simple case of a rare solar micronova, an unprecedented tectonic plasma discharge, or something we simply don't have the physics to understand yet? The evidence is there. How we choose to read it changes everything. I don't need a lost civilization to find any of this unsettling. What actually gets me is simpler. In every one of these 12 cases, we can run a rock, a bone, or a soil layer through modern instruments and get you an exact number, a melting point, a shock pressure, a decay signature, with real confidence. And in every single case, that precise number still isn't enough to close the argument about what actually happened. That's the honest shape of this whole list. Not science is broken, not they're hiding something, just measurement has gotten extraordinarily good and interpretation hasn't caught up everywhere yet. The Scottish forts and the anomalous glass fields are the two that show this best. Real published disagreements between real specialists still unresolved, not because anyone's incompetent, because the physical evidence genuinely supports more than one story right now. If you had to bet on just one of these 12, which one do you think gets resolved first, and which one do you think never fully closes? Tell me your pick and why. I'll read the best arguments in the comments. Because if history really is just on a loop, reality isn't just glitching. We're just getting restarted.